Hello, everybody, and welcome to the final episode of Hidden History for this season. On today's show, we are doing something we have never really done before, which is taking you on a trip outside the United States. Because today we're talking about the historic election of 1945, where Clement Attlee won in a landslide majority out of the hands of wartime Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and with that large majority, ended up shaping modern Britain. So, yes, welcome to Hidden History. Thank you so much for joining us once again here today. And yeah, we're just gonna get right into it. And we're talking today about Clement Attlee. And he is a very interesting person because he is a great example of a time fundamentally where there was so much success and so much really strong movements that shaped history in the wake of World War I. And, the truth was things have been a little bit on the downside in the United States. Some of the most revolutionary, policy and action was, at least in the United States, was happening with the New Deal and before the war and the Great Depression and, a little bit ahead of the game. But, let's just set the scene here because we are looking at the 1945 election, and this here is in the Guardian Politics Past from Derek Brown. Less than 12 weeks earlier, Winston Churchill had announced the unconditional surrender of Nazi Germany. And this is, Winston Churchill at this time is, coming in there was no, scandal that I'm about to tell you about. He was a really proper national hero who just led the country through, being the wartime prime minister, through just grit, determination, and really being, the public face for this war effort and putting himself out there. We saw the darkest hour, the mythology, him building the mythology there was so influential in getting, especially that the battle for Britain and, that period before the United States got in there. But yeah, so Churchill wanted his wartime coalition to continue until Japan too had been defeated. But it was not unduly dismayed when his labor ministers insisted the country be offered a choice. So, pretty much what had happened in, the wartime coalition was pretty much an unprecedented combination of, Clement Attlee, who was the labor leader at the time, and Winston Churchill, to creating kind of a national unity government, national unity, for the working class of Britain. There's going to be a lot of bad British accents in here, from various, parts of England. I'm gonna get into it throughout the time period. Don't you worry here. So yeah, Clement Attlee, prior to the war, or actually throughout the war, has been joining up with Winston Churchill to pretty much at the promise, at the end of the war, I'm gonna get to do my own thing. The Prime Minister called the election for early July, confident the British people would back the greatest hero in their darkest hour. Of all Churchill's colossal misjudgments, this was probably his most egregious. So, yeah, it really was kind of an incredible situation here. Because this mythology around, what we saw with Churchill, it was just as real. From what I can tell, the darkest hour was an accurate portrayal of the way Churchill is still viewed, in the UK, but the voters wanted change, and normally through British politics, just throughout history. When a prime minister seems to be doing well and then calls a general election, it is normally a very bad sign for them. This is the case here with Churchill. The voters wanted an end to wartime austerity. They wanted no return to pre-war economic depression. They had really made this big effort, this big sacrifice. All of them had a total war, every citizen here taking part, and they wanted some change. 3 years earlier, in one of the darkest days of the war, they have been offered a tantalizing glimpse of how things could be in the bright dawn of victory. The economist William Beveridge had synthesized the bravest visions of all important government departments into a single breathtaking view of the future. This is a very, very influential 1942 report, the Beveridge Report. here in one of the toughest times for the Allies in the war, spelled out a system of social insurance covering every citizen regardless of income. Pretty much birthed the cradle-to-grave welfare state. Especially in Europe. That was the great promise, the tension there that dangled, very prominently. People were reading this whole thing throughout the war, and that tension, that, policy idea was powerful enough, through a lot of, movements, societies, labor movements were quite strong in Britain, throughout that time. And that kind of leads to 1945. Though Churchill had presided over the planning for radical social reform, he was generally a hero of the masses, going on the trains, going out with a cigar, talking tough. He was posh, he was just as posh as the rest of them, but really had the big personality that so many people, emphasized with. But he was a real patrician, a true Tory story, all the way through. Though, ironically enough, the Tory manifesto pledges were not all that different from Labour's. The people did not trust him to deliver the brave new world a beverage. So pretty much what he was trying to do there, he was not completely off kilter. He saw where the movement was going, but there were other factors too. The Labour Party had only held office twice before, 1924 and 1929 through 31. But during the war years, its leadership had acquired both experience and trust, and now it kind of been in the junior partner in the government coalition and looked like a party of government for the first time. So Labour's promise to take over the commanding heights of the economy via nationalization were anathema to committed Tories, which still recommended were a big part of the party and still are today. But after nearly 6 years of wartime state direction of the economy, it did not seem nearly so radical as it had before the war, or indeed as it seems now. So here you can see this is really kind of an incredible, the wartime, as it did in the United States, really, lets people know that the government can do this. They can mobilize. The state has the power to do just really kind of incredible things if we put the funding, if we give it the control, if we give it the power to do it, but also, kind of control it in the right ways. Why not control that? Use that mobilization, that power, kind of how, the Greenback movement and Benjamin Butler, we talked about how they felt after the United States Civil War, towards making, winning the peace was the big slogan there. Then there was the military vote. Britain had millions of men and women in uniform in 1945, and understandably, they wanted a better deal. They were scattered over Europe, Far East, and elsewhere. They, more than any other section of the electorate, yearned for change and for a better civilian life. They had fought the most, been through the most, and the military vote there was overwhelmingly pro-Labor. Many students of the 1945 election believe that a key role was played by the Daily Mirror, then the biggest selling paper in Britain and most easily popular among the armed forces. On Victory Day in Europe, the Mirror published an immensely powerful cartoon by the brilliant Philip Zek. It showed a battered, bandaged Allied soldier holding out to the reader a slip of paper marked "Victory in Peace in Europe." Under the drawing was the caption, "Here you are, don't lose it again." And, really what the Clement Attlee, the biggest force in this kind of Clement Attlee coalition were those Allied soldiers, bandaged, battered, bruised, all that. And they were coming home now in a way that was kind of unseen in, British political history, to reclaim their peace after an incredible 6 years of sacrifice that they had made. Ladies and gentlemen, listeners of the Spencer Walsh Radio Network, happy holidays, and thank you so much for supporting us this year. We are willing to give the gift of audio to you this holiday season, and boy, will it keep coming. We have an action-packed schedule through the 17th of December to the 16th of January, and that all starts with new episodes of Newsflash now 3 times a week on our old summer schedule of Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. In addition, Hidden History returns with 6 select episodes, 4 on Tuesdays and 2 on select Thursdays, to give you the perfect historical narrative to keep you interested through those times with the family this holiday season. It's been such a great year, and it couldn't have been as good for the Spencer Walsh Radio Network without your support. So, to another year of great audio. And there's a picture of a monkey on his shoulder. I love the old news was so funny. The little joke. There you have that. Is Clement Attlee, the new prime minister, and with 47.7% of the vote, Labour secured a staggering 393 seats in the House of Commons. The Conservatives, with 39.7, won just 210. The Liberal Party, soon to be Liberal Democrats, I presume, which had governed the country less than a quarter of a century earlier, was reduced to 9% of the vote. They pretty much didn't really recover from that, did they? In just 12 seats. So Clement Attlee, the new prime minister, and on the first day of the new parliament, the massed ranks of Labour members bawled out the socialist anthem, the red flag. Tories everywhere were scandalized. It was a splendid apocryphal story of a lady in a grand London hotel who was overheard exclaiming, "Labour in power, the country will never stand for it." But stand for it they did over the next 6 momentous years. The new prime minister, Clement Attlee, was not obviously cut out for the job. Painfully shy and reserved to the point of coldness, he had the appearance and often the style of a bank clerk. Churchill described him as a sheep in sheep's clothing. The son of a city solicitor, he was educated at Haileybury College, specialized in turning out administrators for the British Raj, I think in the Indian occupation, and at University College, Oxford. Attlee was so far from being a passionate ideologue that his wife Violet casually observed, "Clem was never really a socialist, were you, darling?" Well, not so rabid one. Yet this essentially herbivorous exterior cloaked a steely determination and a deep-seated devotion to social justice first developed during his voluntary work in London's East End before the First World War. After distinguished service in the war, Clement Attlee entered Parliament in 1922, in the Poplar and Limehouse, I think it was just Limehouse, now represented by the wonderful Afsana Begum. In 1931, he declined to join Ramsay MacDonald's National Coalition, preferring to stay with the rump opposition. He became Labour leader in 1935. Though many on the left opposed Labour's participation in Churchill's wartime coalition, at least during the early years when Hitler was allowed the Soviet Union under Stalin, which is kind of crazy now if you think about it. The the horrific, just awful moves that Stalin made there in that decision, causing such, dumb divisions on the left here. He became Lord Privy Seal and from 1942 Deputy Prime Minister, and he was 62 when he entered Downing Street. So yeah, you heard a little bit in that British Path piece there about his team. So the great tide of new Labour MPs that entered in 1945 are really some youngsters, some real hard hitters, and people that would make their mark deeply in the party. So they included Dennis Healey, who was made an impassioned maiden speech urging the World Socialist Revolution, Harold Wilson, future Prime Minister, Michael Foot, and James Callaghan. But the men Attlee leaned on were part of Labour's old guard. His principal props were Nye Bevan, or Ernest Bevan, as his full name was. As you heard there in that, he was a pragmatic trade unionist who had made his mark during the war as an energetic Labour minister. Labour stalwart Hugh Dalton and Stafford Cripps, an aloof intellectual. Churchill once remarked of him, "There but for the grace of God goes God." The Attlee-Bevan alliance was particularly important in protecting the administration from some of its own hotter-blooded members who shared the young Healey's enthusiasm for revolution. Okay, so no, this was Bevan and then Bevan. This is Nye Bevan who we're talking about. Their most potent figurehead was Aneurin Bevan, a fiery orator from the Welsh valleys who constantly urged the government to embrace radical reforms and bitterly resisted any suggesting of trimming pragmatic policy. Like any good kind of social democratic movement, they have their own left wing. They have, the limits of the system. Very kind of similar to, I would say he would be the FDR of Clement Attlee would be the FDR of really Britain. If you look at the kind of political dynamics here, Bevan eventually was to deal with the Attlee administration a hammer blow when he resigned over the reintroduction of NHS prescription charges. For 6 years, though, his was the voice of a truly radical Labour. The Labour Party is a socialist party and proud of it. The stark sentence buried in the party's election manifesto of 1945, which promised that Labour would take control of the economy, and in particular the manufacturing industry. The manifesto pledged the nationalization of the Bank of England, the fuel and power industries, inland transportation, and iron and steel. And with a majority more than 150, the party could not be denied. One by one, the key industries of the post-war economy tumbled toward the public sector, where they're subject to elaborate planning controls. For the most part, these takeovers were quite popular, none more so than the nationalization of the coal mines, really, especially in the north of England, creating an absolutely rock-solid base of labor support and labor action that really proved incredibly strong. And I would say, some people may disagree with this. It was a key part for Margaret Thatcher, but really key win for Margaret Thatcher was destroying them in the 1980s and all that. But it really gave her legacy a stain that she probably, in my opinion, never really recovered from. But pit owners, they still employed 1 million men, many of them in dire and dangerous conditions. The new National Coal Board was seen as a much more humanitarian institution, over one just concerned about profit. Other nationalizations were regarded more cynically. No sooner had British Railways taken over the old regional semi-private networks than jokes began to circulate about unreliable crowded trains, crumbling stations, and the old standby of British comedy, the buffet sandwich. I don't know, but I'm pretty sure British Rail is still around today. I'm not sure. But after the initial euphoria of nationalization, it wasn't long before doubts began to emerge. The state industries were smothered by bureaucracy, and as we see in the development of the meritocracy that we saw very similar in the in the 60s with Kennedy and all those people and Carter in the United States. So they were smothered by demands of labor's economics gurus, both amateur and professional. And it's sometimes argued that Attlee's government's main disadvantage was that Britain had been on the winning side of the war. British cities and industries had been bashed around by German air raids, but not suffered wholesale destruction, which allowed a renaissant German economy to start from a clean sheet. Most importantly, British economic class structures and bitter enmities survived the war unscathed. And, I think one of the biggest forces of opposition to Attlee, as it was with any kind of real serious labor government like we saw with Jeremy Corbyn, was the British elite. And the British elite, you may think the class solidarity is strong here in America. It is just to a whole different level because a lot of these people are literally related. They grow up together. They go to the same schools together. They get the same jobs together. And you're literally, have the same exact life and are in a very, very, often marry each other in a very kind of close circle of people in the British elite. And you can see, the results that it has, and that is, directly descended from, the times of feudalism and all that. So they survived these economic systems here. They survived the war unscathed in contrast to countries that have been so traumatized by invasion and occupation, none more so than Germany, into completely rethinking their economic cultures. But the other obstacles in the path of labor's would-be revolutionaries were, broke. Were the fact that one of them, the country was broke. It imported wealth into the war effort in 1945, was groaning under a mountain of debt. It had pawned off many of its valuable assets, including a whole slice of overseas investment to service that debt. And even when the war was finally over, the victorious, impoverished British maintained vast numbers of men and resources tied up in an empire on which, really the sun was certainly setting after World War II. And, for all the culture in Britain, it could be argued that they still have not realized that today. But, all in all, Clement Attlee's government really was a big boost forward for Europe, setting standards of the global welfare state and, actually making it, providing us an example for left-wingers, of all stripes all over the world, that a big state, like it can be done. It can be done. All possibilities are alive here, and especially in a situation, coming after, defeating Winston Churchill, instituting the programs that make life so much better for everyday people in modern Britain. Just some really absolutely incredible achievements to behold there. So, I thought it would be a perfect way to end this season of Hidden History by talking about a little bit of Clement Attlee.